So tell me again, how did this series get to this point exactly? Rocky IV came out in 1985, and just like the last few movies, begins with a recap of the previous film. In this case, it's a recap of Rocky III. So at this point, Rocky Balboa and Apollo Creed are best friends. They're living the life, they have their money. Rocky buys Paulie a robot for his birthday. I'll get to that a little later. So things are just beautiful right now. Things could not be any better. And then the Soviet Union decides to fuck everything up and enter professional boxing. They want to challenge their champion, Ivan Drago, played by Dolph Lundgren, against Rocky Balboa. But Apollo Creed looks at this and says, I will be goddamned if that commie comes into the United States without fighting me first. So the Russians agree to have Drago fight Creed in an exhibition match, and it goes about as well as you'd expect it to go. As in, not very well. In fact, Apollo Creed dies in the ring. Ivan Drago's punches are so powerful that he kills Creed in the ring. So Rocky decides to fight Drago himself to avenge the death of his friend, and the rest of the movie is him beefing up to try and fight Ivan Drago. Now, out of all the Rocky sequels that I haven't seen, this is the one that I was the most excited to see because I've heard so much about this particular movie. People consider it to be the staple of the goofy nature, like one of the more classic Rocky movies, besides the first one, obviously. But people say that while Rocky is a timeless movie, this movie is great for that era of cheesy 80s action movies like Commando or Rambo First Blood Part 2, which, funny enough, both came out in the same year as Rocky IV. And I can appreciate a cheesy action movie for what it is. If it's going for dumb fun and that's its mission statement, then I'm down for it. I really do enjoy Commando. Sure, it's stupid as hell, and so is Rambo First Blood Part 2, but I enjoy those movies. I have fun watching them. And with Rocky IV, I also had a lot of fun watching this as well. For half of the movie, because the other half made me go, how did we start from an Academy Award-winning drama to an incredibly cheesy 80s action movie that loses all the charm and humbleness that made the original so great? I'm still trying to figure that out because this movie is still somewhat fresh in my mind. But I do have to say that one thing that definitely makes you go, what happened, is Sylvester Stallone's performance as Rocky. This is the first movie where he is actually bland as the character that he created. Rocky is his child, and at this point, the character is incredibly generic. And there are points where Stallone's acting is just so average that he mumbles a lot of his dialogue, so you can't really understand what he's trying to say. A lot of people like to make fun of Stallone for the way he talks, especially when he plays the Rocky character. But in the first few movies, you can at least understand what he's saying. Here, he mumbles right to the point where he's almost unintelligible. You really cannot understand a word that he's saying. But the only thing that keeps Sylvester Stallone from being the worst actor in the movie is Dolph Lundgren as Ivan Drago. This character is supposed to be the polar opposite from Clubber Lang from Rocky III, where Clubber Lang was just a shit-talking motherfucker. Ivan Drago is just a silent bodybuilder type who hardly speaks any dialogue, and when he does, it's the cheesiest one-liners you've ever heard. More famously is his line, "I must break you," right before the big fight at the end between him and Rocky. And yeah, sure, we remember it, but Ivan Drago really has no other personality except being a brute. There is nothing that's interesting about Drago at all, and between the two villains or adversaries that Rocky faces after Creed, I really like Clubber Lang more because he has more of a personality and more of a reason to hate him and root for Rocky even further once the finale of Rocky III happens. With Ivan Drago, there isn't any personality to define him, so when the final match comes around, you can't really hate the guy. I mean, he's a shithead for killing Apollo Creed, but he's more like a pawn. The best way to describe him is he's a Street Fighter character, right down to the point where they even inject steroids into him to make him a super boxer. He is, by definition, a video game character, just that unbeatable guy that you just keep punching him out, and he'll eventually go down. Now, before we move on to the things I did like about this movie, because this movie's not terrible, I just have to comment on the thing that you look at and go, why is that even here? And that is the robot that Rocky buys for Paulie at the beginning of the movie. This is one of the aspects that adds to the whole, how did we get from here to there scenario when comparing Rocky to Rocky 4. Because this robot literally comes out of nowhere. There's no foreshadowing to it. It pops up in certain random places. And after a while, they just kind of leave it to the background. And you just wonder, why is this thing even here? It feels completely out of place. So while the other things that I mentioned are bad, the robot is the one thing in this movie I can point to and say, I despise that thing. But this movie does a lot of things well. Where it really shines for me is in the soundtrack. The soundtrack is one of the most rockin' soundtracks I've ever heard for a movie. It just features a couple of really cool 80s songs. One of them is Burning Heart by Survivor. And even the score itself is something that you can get into. It's done by Vince DiCola, not Bill Conti, who did the first 3 Rocky movies. Vince DiCola is the guy who did the score for the Transformers movie, another movie that had a really kick-ass soundtrack. And there are a lot of montages that accompany the soundtrack where you just watch Rocky training and Drago training, and it really gets your spirit up. It makes you really want to work out. If you want to know what my playlist is whenever I try to work out, it mainly consists of the Rocky theme, Gonna Fly Now, Eye of the Tiger from Rocky 3, and the soundtracks to Rocky 4 and the Transformers movie from 1986. The final battle between Drago and Rocky is really cheesy, but it is very entertaining to watch. There's really no emotional weight to it because you don't hate Ivan Drago the way you do with Clubber Lang, but it's still a very entertaining fight. But if I had to say one thing, Rocky goes the full 15 rounds before defeating Drago, and he takes 10 times the abuse that Creed took before he got killed in the ring. But once the fight is over, Rocky just comes out victorious with a cut and a slightly swollen eye. Whereas in Rocky and Rocky 2, he was totally beaten up. You could tell this guy took a pounding. Compared to this, where he's fighting a super roided out boxer, how is it that he only manages to get away with a cut and a slightly swollen eye? He should have looked like Glenn from The Walking Dead at the end of this match. In case you people are wondering out there, no, I don't watch The Walking Dead. However, Glenn's death was such a big deal that it was unavoidable, so I know about that. So to wrap things up, Rocky 4, is it a good movie? Not really, no, but I did have a lot of fun. I would be lying if I said that this wasn't an entertaining movie because it's got a great soundtrack. The training montages are awesome, well edited, and it'll get your blood boiling to just, like I said, be a better person physically. So normally I would say, well, it's an 80s action movie that's really cheesy. I had fun with it. It's not really a great movie, but it is a good one. But I cannot give it the rating good but not great because, as I said before, this is the 3rd sequel to the Academy Award-winning Rocky. How the fuck did we go from a brilliant, flawless drama about a small-time boxer rising up to an incredibly cheesy, over-the-top action movie where your villain is pretty much someone out of Street Fighter? So, for that reason alone, I have to say watch at your own risk. If you hold Rocky to an incredibly high standard and are not a fan of cheesy 80s action movies, then don't bother with this one. However, if you can accept one of these movies for what they are, then I would definitely say give it a watch. It's definitely entertaining, but I don't enjoy it as much as I do Commando or Rambo First Blood Part 2, just for the reason that I listed, that it's the 3rd sequel to an Oscar-winning film. So that's my review for Rocky 4. Next week is going to be Rocky 5. Oh my god, I'm dreading this. I am not looking forward to seeing Rocky 5 at all, but I gotta do it. So look for that review next week. And until then, I hope you enjoyed this review. Leave a comment down below and tell me what your thoughts are on Rocky 4, if and when you've seen it. And as always, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.